mention that there were men as dark as this? Wow, look at that nose. He's just like a pig. He's a monster! Hut!
In today's episode, I'm joined by Pilleater, who is the head of a website called Asian Aryanism, which is quite controversial, I'd say, just by the name. Thank you for joining me today.
Hey, what's up? Is it Angel Dodger?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't get your name. Angel Dodger. Hey, Angel Dodger. Thanks. I got in the right time. I'm a little tired today, but I got on the right time. So, hey, how's it going?
No problem. Good. And my first question for you would, I guess, be a little bit obvious. What does Asian Aryanism mean? What does your website stand for?
Okay, so obviously, I don't know who watches your channel. I haven't actually had time to watch some of your videos, but a little bit about myself and what www.asianaryanism.com means. I started the project officially on November the 3rd, 2016. It was first referenced in a podcast on StarkTruthRadio.com with Robert Stark. And if you don't know what the Robert Stark podcast is, it's a very long podcast since the days of, I would say, it started in 2010 on an old red site called Voice of Reason Radio Network, which has ties of the early beginning of the alt-right. But I was a fan. I was invited to go on Stark Truth's website or his podcast, and I basically first said the term Asian Aryanism on that podcast. It's kind of old now. It's been a year. But really it goes farther than back. I think it was even the summer of 2016, me and my friends were flirting about this concept. Well, if the alt-right is going to accept other mixed-race people, well, what do you assume about this white Asian thing happening? Is that kind of an Asian Aryan thing? So it was kind of started as a joke, but since then, I've done a co-host position with Robert Stark for about a year, and it became almost a reoccurring gag, or at least an actual intellectual concept, to talk about a bicultural relationship and what the alt-right calls, a future after liberalism. And so that's been how it's been formed. Originally, the website was a Tumblr page, and I do believe you could find the Tumblr page still somewhere on the internet, but that was back in February until a good friend of mine, he actually made the WordPress website, and I moved my operations over there. One friend owned it for a time. It was just until recently, about a few months ago, that I bought my own server to have the website, and now the website really just is a personal blog of mine, and sometimes a friend or two will post, but I'm mainly active on my own Discord server, my YouTube channel at youtube.com/Pilleater, and I'm pretty much a guy that talks about Asian Aryanism. But if you want to know that's what the whole project about, I would say it's definitely an art project. But yeah, that's kind of where Asian Aryanism comes from, and I'm very sincere with it. If there's one thing people joke around, is that when I just want to reference one thing, when people hear the word Aryanism, it assumes that you're talking about a master race of some sort. When I use the term facetiously, where it certainly brings up ideals of being anti-liberal and politically incorrect, and it definitely gets the ideal across. I mean, I could have used the word Eurasian futurist, which I've been using now, Eurasian futurism. I find Asian Aryanism to be very blunt, but I'm blunt in those terms because I would consider myself a Goedian, probably a follower of Jim Goad and his work, and this ideal that shock art and punk rock culture is still effective in some means, but people have lost its meanings behind, and I kind of love that niche of just, shocking normies and kind of. But then again, Asian Aryanism, it's sincere, and the word is now a brand name, and I'll use it so as long as I get my own media across. I know I could say something more professional and talk about Eurasianism, but Asian Aryanism is sticking, and there's already a website, and I really can't change it.
Okay. Now you mentioned master race. Now I looked at your website, and it says, if I'm not mistaken, something about a master race of Eurasians. So you say that it's not about creating a master race, but the website says sort of that, does it not?
I do believe on the About page, which I wrote, it talks about, well, when people hear the word Aryanism, they assume it's a master race. But again, I use the term facetiously to talk about, well, if we are talking about groups, then we're going to talk about race. And assumingly, it's often a plan in the alt-right to create a quote-unquote white ethno-state. Just recently, Richard Spencer has announced Operation Homeland, which basically, with the word operation, it sounds like some terrorist organization about to create some white man Zionism or something. And people are really investing time into this ideal of alt-right ideologies that will be post-multicultural and diverse. And when we're talking about master race, it's, again, this ideal that brings up supremacy, and I am not a supremacist. I think, but I do believe there are, ruling people that want to be with people like themselves, and I understand that there is definitely a standard in America that I would agree that the thing I point out is the biggest hypocrisy you can see today is that when white liberals talk about multiculturalism and diversity, it really just means, well, what's in it for us white liberals and how can we consume other non-whites' material goods? And when I say, if I ever do say a Eurasian master race, I'm referring to a group of bourgeois white mice people and their Asian wives or Asian men with white wives who are basically in this urban metrosexual niche that pretends that there's no such thing as race, yet it's clearly evident there is this weird Eurasian side of things, right? You can't be fully white because then you'll be cisgendered and you'll be patriarchal. But if you are Asian or something like that, well, you can pass as that. And just from my own observations, I've seen that this is like the ideal that mulatto futurism isn't happening. There's a website, the rightstuff.biz. There's a blog piece. I always cannot remember the guy who wrote the blog, but he wrote something about mulatto futurism, saying that our multicultural and diverse society loves to engineer mulatto futurism. This is the ideal that whites and blacks are going to, create mulatto people, and there's going to be this bicultural union. And you see that everywhere in the, media and toys and stuff like that. We see it in Star Wars and Disney's A Wrinkle in Time, and it's just force on that. Yet it doesn't really happen that so much in numbers. And according to Pew Research Center in a 2015 interracial relationships, Hispanic is the highest, followed by white and Asian relationships. So there's something weird that mulatto futurism isn't adding up, and rather there is this Eurasian thing going on. And this is where I'm trying to poke at for most of the time. So for the whole master race thing, again, I use it jokingly to refer these people because it's ironic that these people are against such forms of supremacy when in fact they are the ones showing that they want to be preferred with people like themselves. So if that could clear up anything. So
okay. I wanted to make a quick mention on the white liberal stuff. I agree with you that white liberals tend to be fake in terms of their stance on multiculturalism. It is about, for them, multiculturalism on their terms. What can we get out of, black, Hispanics, Asians? Because really it's about, preaching multiculturalism while not really pushing multiculturalism policies or ideologies. I'll give you that. But what I find interesting is that you seem to be a member of the alt-right, right?
Well, I have been flirting with them for about almost 10 years, I guess, yes.
But you're Asian yourself, right? You're half.
I don't know if you know this. That was a joke. That was a joke that was for 9 months, and people went along with it until I actually made a video saying I wasn't Eurasian. So I'm sorry. As much as I wish I could be that, I'm not roaming millennial.
So what exactly are you?
Well, I seem to be a mixed European American person of Irish, Polish, Yeah, the Hungarian backgrounds. That's probably just another, if you want to say, white Americana. And you would just say, well, that's just normally white. Again, I don't really much what's to say in that. You just call me a white American, but I'm not hiding anything else. So
Okay. One more point I wanted to make before I get to my question. Now you mentioned getting cisgendered if you're white. I understand that white male cisgender is something that is pushed by the left because it's about destroying the patriarchy and getting at white men, and liberals seem to be, especially minority liberals, seem to be on top of that. But cisgender is something that is supposedly, I don't agree with the term completely, but it's supposed to be somebody who was born of a specific gender and identifies as that. So I get why you may feel targeted as a white man, why that's like a slur in some cases, but it is supposed to mean that. But liberals usually tend to, I'm a liberal myself, but I know that liberals tend to use words that are supposed to mean something good, and then they turn it into a slur like patriarchy. Well, not even good, but like something that you're supposed to dismantle. Like patriarchy is constantly used as a slur whenever it's to the liberals' advantage. So I'll give you that. I just wanted to mention that some of the things that you were mentioning weren't completely things I agreed with.
Using the term as if, the insults, like you just said.
Yes. And as a liberal, I can recognize that. So you're flirting with the alt-right, but you're not. What is your political stance on the left-right spectrum?
Okay, sure. Well, again, I will say, since I was a teenager, I was pretty much an art student. I was interested always in art. Back in 2009 or 8, it was pretty interesting to get into politically incorrect thoughts. 10 years ago, it was very uncanny and unorthodox, and it was kind of thrilling. I was listening to skinhead music because it's racist, and when you're young that age, you don't care. And so this whole thing from you're interested in shock art bands like White House and Anal Cunt, and you're listening to Screwdriver. One thing leads to another. Like I said, I used to follow Voice of Reason Radio Network, which was an old white nationalist 1.0 network. Now, I didn't take those beliefs sincere, but I was interested in hearing what they had to say on the matters. Now we see today that in the alt-right spectrum, today, from this year and last year, it's became a household name, and we see an entire millennial generation now openly, if you want to say, national socialist or some radical. It's just plain in the air. It's just there. So. But again, doing the stuff 10 years ago, it was pretty much uncanny, and it was weird and fringe, and a part of that eccentric behavior. Now, I don't subscribe 100% with the ideals of the alt-right. What I do subscribe is the ideal of the anti-liberal, multicultural, diverse paradigm. And this is a trend we are seeing that is postmodern, or at least the death of the whole postmodern school of thought. It seems to me that all of the 80s academics were arguing for the end of history and a postmodern eclecticism, that nothing matters. And what's really popular is the biggest YouTube celebrities are basically people or normal people saying red-pilled thoughts, which are anti-liberal thoughts. Politically, I've been around the spectrum, and even in college, I would not only go and have friends in the Christian club, but there would be friends in the Party of Socialism and Liberation Club, as socialism was more active on campus. You couldn't have a far right group. The first time I went to an actual white nationalist meeting when I was about 21. And they were a bunch of homo nationalists, very eccentric people who are both openly gay and white nationalists. This is before Milo. And again, you're only flirting with this in terms of you find these people interesting. But again, if Antifa finds out about these doings, they want to stalk you, they want to make fun of you and bully you. And now we see Antifa just exploded, and everybody makes fun of Antifa. I know Ministry has a song. I don't know if it's sincerely about Antifa, but it's there. It's now that has become a household name as well. So politically, I flirted with a term called alt-left, and this is what the Stark Truth Radio Network, some of me and my friends, and especially Brandon Adamson's website, www.altleft.com, is about. I'm not talking about Antifa or SJWs. I am talking about basically a left-wing faction of the anti-liberal thought, meaning that we agree that the left is just pathetic. It just supports nihilism and materialistic upholdedness, and it has no roots. And it seems to me that there are genuinely good ideals that the left supports. It's just that everything's so bad, and everything is so, you can't have discussions anymore. And so you just have to rebuild these things. I mean, last year I was flirting and talking about alt-left, and I've had made claims saying Asian Aryanism, or at least this Eurasian project, is an alt-left thing. I could associate myself as an alt-left person, and that might be true, but again, I'm everywhere, and when politically asked, I say I'm just a Eurasian futurist.
You're not necessarily, because, I mean, some of the things that you kind of pander to on your website would be close to the alt-right. So it's a little bit, I mean, like, you mentioned things that, you use terminology. I know you say that it's not necessarily what you feel, but you use terminology and you use people to, when you explain Eurasian people, you know, people who are white males dating Asian women, like that's, you're citing people who are in the alt-right or extreme right. So to say that you're alt-left, I guess I would like to know, like, what is it about the left that you find to be good, and where you stand with the left and the right?
Yeah, it's very confusing, because someone would say to me, and I always get criticism of this, is like, well, you're supporting this Eurasian ideal, and yet you're doing the worst aspects of this. You're referencing far right imagery and all this shock art thing. So I don't know what you are. And again, I am very influenced by I'm very influenced by a book called Apocalypse Culture, edited by Adam Parfrey. The whole Feral House publishing company, 9-banded books by Chip Smith, the publication works of Jim Goad. Again, I would call myself a Goadian, which is not a Wikipedia term, but it defines as a certain subculture in the 90s where there was a group of shock artists that would try to push their limits. They're kind of pre-alt-right, but not exactly alt-right. They just only did it because they wanted to get certain points across, and about the ideals of fringe concepts, how far can people accept these ideals. Now, accordingly, when you ask me, well, politically, what elements of the left do I find bad or wrong? I would say the most wrong part about the left today is its staunch egalitarianism. It basically, I thought at one point in time the left wing just meant people's interest or the interest of being free, you know. But now it's it means that to be a leftist today, you have to fight for equality or this forced egalitarianism. There's nothing wrong with justice or being at a fair level, but certainly I could see every leftist politician today or think tank wants to make forced egalitarianism where they have to cut off somebody who has more power than them, and it shows you that it's this post-Marxism that won't go away. And what motivates the right wing today is that supports inegalitarianism, that Mother Nature is ultimate, and that people are different. And that message seems to be more in accordance with reality than a fixed, as Nick Land puts it, transhumanist philosophy, which the left is arguing for. It's socially engineered to construct something, and it's basically science fiction, the left. And so what I don't like about the left is I think they basically died almost 100 years ago. And if you want to borrow Paul Gottfried's term, there's cultural Marxism everywhere. You just have normal people who use it, like the new church ladies, as religion. There's no grounding. Their only grounding philosophers are like Derrida, Deleuze, Foucault. It doesn't add up. It's just this thing, and you can refute all that. They just don't want to open up, and they would rather take the easy way out. So yeah, those are the things I don't like about the left.
Okay. To add to that, I think that the differences between the left and the right are it can be explained with the SJWs. I feel like the SJWs are the chemotherapy to the cancerous right, because when you say that the right is more about like the natural differences, I'm not going to deny that there are natural differences between men and women and sometimes between races, but it's more deep esteemed in like culture rather than be like IQ or skin color. And the SJW or the far left will, like chemotherapy, try to cure all the differences between people by just saying that somebody who mentions the differences between genders is a sexist no matter what they say, or the races between differences between the races as racist no matter what they say. And you lose people when you have that lazy leftism of just saying everybody's equal, don't question anything, because then that just doesn't make any sense. There are some differences sometimes. In some cases it's negligible, but the left doesn't even want to discuss that because then you become a racist and a sexist. So that's, I think, the problem with the left. And we need to get rid of that SJWism, that chemotherapy type system that the left has to trying to cure all sorts of racism and sexism. But I digress. That's just my thoughts.
No, that's exactly what the whole alt-left position's about. It's just getting rid of the whole insanity and trying to say, well, we're living in a future time where the left just doesn't exist. And again, left and right-wing terminologies, it's a definition in Western politics. And if everything was really balanced, we could live in a society where it's okay to be left-wing and it's okay to be right-wing. But because there's such a spiritual divide between left-wing, right-wing, it's really the only war that matters. I mean, Julius Evola, esoteric guy, often cited on the alt-right, explains that it's the left-hand path and the right-hand path, alluding to magic as well, that one's a path of destruction and one's the path of lightness. And it's really weird how, if you think in those terms, that it's an ultimate spiritual war. I mean, the reactionaries believe in this. The reactionaries believe that the left is almost, not that it's cancer, but something in Western history about that people want to have these ultimate changes compared to the natural world. But I don't subscribe. I think it's interesting philosophy, but I think people should, a good society, you can be both left-wing or right-wing, but you can still be friends. But accordingly, we live in such a weird time where you basically you be on the red team or your blue team. So yeah, it's impossible at this point.
Okay. Moving on to the next part of my questioning, what are your views on race? Do you feel like there are differences between races, or are you left or right on that? Or
well, after reading the Bell Curve and being exposed to American Renaissance, I do believe there are differences among the races. Now, that doesn't mean that people should be segregated and divided. It just means it's a race realist position, and you shouldn't just follow the blank slate social construction theory that fast. I mean, I think it's the individual matters, and if the individual can trump racial differences, then you can have a special person. One book I really enjoy is A Personal Odyssey by Tom Sowell. I think that book is excellent and talks about, again, his own personal odyssey. Now, it doesn't mean you're taken down by race and you're forever in this niche and you can't get out of it. I do believe there is just a poor understanding about the natural world and race, and there's this social engineering program going on to avoid those differences, and there's some weird Kalergi plan going on to try to make people this ultimate brown race that doesn't make any sense, or try to create America like Brazil. I think what's going to happen is often people would want to be with people like themselves. It's kind of like the shoe theory. And if people want to be with people that have similar interests, then let them be. It sounds very libertarian on the subject, but I personally seen this with the ideal of biculturalism. I'm not a fan of the whole multicultural regime, but I do believe biculturalism is something that has been happening, and we've seen, or at least there's been recorded instances of biculturalism going its own way. I think multiculturalism, what it does is that it tries to say that everyone should forcibly get along, which is a byproduct of the whole egalitarian thing, and then it's a source of tension and conflict. But if you have levels of biculturalism, maybe that's happening in Singapore, then the levels can be balanced, and you can have more proper understanding of things. But accordingly, people want to jump to conclusions and say it's multicultural. And I think there needs to be more discussion, or at least research behind a working bicultural society than a multicultural one, because we've already seen the effects of multiculturalism.
Okay. Speaking of bicultural, we'll get to the meat of my questioning. Why do you think that there's a connection between whites and Asians, specifically white males and Asian females?
I think it really has happened in the past about 40 years. And now you can go longer than that, and some people said it's been this whole historical thing. But I think it really has began pretty much after, I think, World War II. There was this ideal that, you'd be sorry for the Japanese and, you bomb them or something like that. And then in the 60s and 70s, there was a whole civil rights thing. And but I think the reason why I quote the 80s first is because that whole Gen X generation growing up is bombarded with, Nintendo Entertainment System and the upcoming first English dubs of anime that is not Speed Racer or Eighth Man. And there was also the flirtation of William Gibson's Neuromancer, flirting about that Japan would rule over the world, and this ideal of basically, it's not that it's like this multicultural world, but it seems to me this idea where everyone has their balances and whatnot. And as that multicultural regime was being plowed in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, I think what happened is, I'll put it like this. There's a Nick Budegas comic. Nick Budegas is the shock artist who used to do comics for his pen name was A White Man, and he would do like really offensive racist stuff. You probably have seen the typical the Jew character that he has with the nose, but he wrote this one comic where he talks about how confused people were in 97, and he said, well, white women are going out with black men, and he draws this really crudely because they're stronger and they fill in this masculine fantasy and they go with them. And then the white, educated, upper-class white guy is going with Asian women. And he's joking, say, what do you get? A mongrelized, muddy America. So he's being shocking and he's trying to be offensive. But the wisdom through that he was pointing this out already in the 90s, is that I think that happened in a large scale. A large interest of that was happening. Again, I don't have any statistics or numbers, but I think it's definitely cultural. Again, what else was happening in the 90s? I'm looking also at the same time Andrea Tumine, any of Tumine's work with Optic Nerve I can think of. But let's fast forward today. You turn on the TV. It seems that every American cartoon is anime influenced, and everything takes place on the internet. We have video games like Undertale, which is basically a Eurasian project. We have music that's just more Asian influence, but again, this weird ideal where it's still quote-unquote white. We have these influences that echo William Gibson's Neuromancer. But again, it shows you that this Francis Fukuyama end of world scenario is not living up. It seems like that old baby boomer generation is dying, and there's a whole younger generation who's been fed off of fictitious narratives about making their life as an anime. And so they're going to approach Asian women with that ideal. And for the Asian women, they're going to think of white men as being kind of this natural glitch, that they're certainly not like Asian men because they don't follow Confucius order. I'm probably talking about Chinese men, but so and there's a lot of whitewashed Asian people, if I want to put it in crude terms like that. Now there's this argument saying, well, what about the Asian men? Don't they get a slice? Well, I do believe there are Asian men who are dating white women casually in the same area. So as long as you have that bicultural union, that follows. And of course, with the whole alt-right thing, the alt-right doesn't want to believe it. The alt-right believes, in classic race realist statistics about, well, multiracialism, mixed racing doesn't really happen, yada, yada, It's all a narrative. But again, I strongly believe these narratives that have been passed, the past millennial generation, is really affecting the way we think about people. And what I'm getting at with the whole Asian Aryan project is that it's this ideal where liberals lie about, Christian Lander's Stuff White People Like. It's a great book. It's a book about, what the racial characteristics of white people are today. And white liberals, the people in Stuff White People Like, they will lie about what they're doing and go with their natural instincts towards something of their own, quote-unquote white interest. What I'm saying is they're accidentally creating a third position people a Eurasian people or some bicultural white Asian elite that pretty much excludes blacks and other non-whites is because, well, they're not the model minority. They're not smart enough, or they're not into the interest what white people like. It seems like Asians fit that model. So in a way, I'm saying is multiculturalism has become racist, or that there's a racist transhumanism going on. And that's what I'm getting at with the whole white Asian thing. I'm not saying it's bad. You could say it's bad, but what I'm saying is there's going to be identity politics about that, and there's going to be a niche and interest. And those people already doing that, not that I'm rubbing in their face, but I'm saying, well, you got to claim who you are. You can't just pretend race doesn't exist. You can't say you have no destiny. You can't say everybody's an individual. You got to claim yourself and say, I have a future, and it's with this bicultural union, and you've got to take responsibility. And I think no bourgeois white mice people want to take control or destiny because they're nihilist and they don't have them. And I'm just trying to put a sense of identitarianism back into the whole scheme.
Okay. I have opposing thoughts. Just want to get them out of my chest because I feel like they need to be said in terms of why white male, Asian female is so popular. I think that it was socially constructed for a variety of reasons. I believe that white men use Asian women as a sideshow, or I guess like a substitute for white women who turn to feminism.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yep.
And I think that Asians were used overall as a counter argument to the civil rights movement. So, going into the model minority. So, to give a brief history, like in the 19th century, you have the Exclusion Act. You have internment camps in the 20th century for the Japanese. The Asians were demonized by white people just like they were black, like they would black people. And then in the 1960s, you had the model minority myth established. And the white media is saying, look, why are the blacks complaining about all this civil rights? You have Asians who work hard and, make it in our society, which isn't even necessarily true. But that construct of, Asians making it, blacks not, made Asians who were already, I guess, in their minds, ready to assimilate to the winning team, which is white people, like gravitate towards them more and stay away from blacks, which created a divide between the Asian and black communities, and said, which was basically to keep white power intact. That's what the white people wanted. As for why Asian men don't necessarily go towards white women, it's because in the way that white people have demonized Asian men in the media, they've been feminized, they've been demonized in ways that Asian women haven't. So they're less desirable. They weren't basically a counter argument to feminism or anything else. So they got the full brunt of what it means to be stereotyped in America, which is why white women or women in general don't gravitate towards Asian men. So I think that the Asian white complex, I guess, is more just a way for white men to still maintain their power, to not have to answer to feminism, which I don't agree with overall, but like women getting independence, white women getting independence, they don't have to respond to that because the Asian is willing to go towards a white man out of her own self-hate, out of her own white worshipping, willing to assimilate into the white man's culture. They're willing to do what the white woman won't do. So that's why they gravitate towards white men. White men are looking for a replacement for white feminists, and I think that's why it's been constructed. I think there's a lot of self-hate. I think there's a lot of, feminizing of Asian women that makes them more desirable to white men. And I guess another point that I want to make is how white supremacists or white nationalists just illogically go towards Asian women. You have Richard Spencer, who wants a white ethno-state, talking about how he's dated Asian women. You have John Derbyshire, who has shat on black people for generations, well, not generations, for years, I should say, and shat on his own children who are half Chinese, married to an Asian woman who doesn't care about this.
Yeah, that list goes on. It's bigger than what you think, actually. That's funny you may say that.
So I guess my point is that, listen, there's nothing wrong with an interracial relationship. There's nothing wrong with being a certain skin color. But when it comes to white male, Asian female, this particular relationship is sometimes, and a lot more than we think, based off of whites trying to replace white women who have left them for feminism and Asian women looking to be accepted into white society. That's my take on, and shit on black people at the same time. That's
I mean, that's the controversy behind it, and that's very interesting. The controversy behind it is what you just said, and you could say, it's very materialistic, and it's based upon self-hate, and everything's bad about it. However, it's interesting to think in those terms because, again, back in the 90s, that wasn't really no one thought of that on that such meta level. It just was, and people were just like, oh, this is really interesting. And there was a whole West Coast art scene of music into that. I could reference, I'm thinking of the art of Tim Biscup and Andrew Tumini. I mean, I could say some names, but I don't want to go through, digress into art. But 20 years later, here we are talking about how white male, Asian female is some kind of evil or bane or something. Now, this is exactly, which I want to rewind and say, this is exactly why I associate with apocalypse culture and call myself a Godian, is because, well, if you want to blame white male, Asian female for being such a constructive evil power, that's the worst thing in the world, well, what do? You just say, that's what I am. I'm basically a monster. I'm evil. And so what happens is you create this own new punk rock culture around it. And you create this ideal where it's like, if you tell the Asian girl, you're nothing but a self-hatred Asian girl that wants to suck white dick and do whatever you want, well, she's just going to embrace that. And for the white guy, well, it seems to me that white men are secretive about it, and they don't want to come out. They want to, as the alt-right puts it, beta cuck losers or something. I don't even like that term. But this ideal that, if you give them the power to speak in their own terms and be unapologetic what they're doing, I think a lot of these problems would be solved. The reason why there's such harsh criticism, as you putting it, is because, as I put it, bourgeois white mice, they don't want to be open about it. They just want to live another day in their office cubicle, making money, and creating this bad system that creates the alt-right and everything, which is terrible. But if these people were to awaken the beast inside, I think people would get more edgier and angrier. And you could see this whole new punk rock scene that is happening. I mean, I don't want to say juju or something, but I'm saying is I have friends and associates who are basically this feeling. And then the white nationalist will say, and that's why multiracialism or biculturalism doesn't make sense. It's because you create self-hating people without a future. And guess what? The Hapa subreddit led by a Jew named Eurasian Tiger, he's saying, well, they're bad anyway. So we got to create the Kalergi plan and this whole multicultural thing. So you have both the left and right hating on something that is so. It's not that. It's like hate people who are losers, and you're on the losing side if you're white male, Asian female. Again, I've never bashed Asian male, white female. I strongly believe in bicultural union. It seems that people get lost in this term that it's either there's two opposing patriarchies. We have white male or Asian male, and it's in a power struggle between the two. I believe that when you have, let's say, Eurasian male, Eurasian female, you'll have an Eurasian patriarchy. And I do believe if you do have that, you can have some balances between white patriarchy and Asian patriarchy, putting their influences together. People often have this tug of war, who should be in control. I think there should be one force of power, and one person should put, his foot onto it. But again, there's hardly any words or meetings to write about it. And I think I'm pretty much the only person blogging about this. There's some other people in niches, and you find them in the fringe parts of maybe Tumblr culture writing about this. But again, it's just a unheard subject and needs a lot of more exposure. And I think I'm investing in something that is definitely going to boom in the next 10 years.
Okay. Just to add to that, to your point, I think that there's a lot of hate coming from non-white people when it comes to Asian women going to the white man for a couple of reasons. I think it's because, I don't know if you've seen this, but particularly in the 2000s, early 2010s, you saw a lot of Asian women complaining about yellow fever and how men of all races, but particularly white men preferring to date Asian women and how it was creepy. Yet, as we both saw, Asian women, by every study that's been measured, have continuously gone to white men. So right. That hypocrisy angered a lot of people of color, including Asians. Also seeing how Asian women would emasculate certain men of color, like black men. There's a lot of anti-blackness in Asian culture. There's a lot of anti-Asian male rhetoric in Asian culture. I interviewed somebody in my last episode who talked about how, white men are more well endowed. You hear that all the time, and that white men are more exotic and they have more money and stuff like that. She criticized Asian men for pursuing money, but praised white men for taking, Asian women on trips and stuff like that, which costs money.
It's what's even weird about this? It's also a poor understanding of sexual politics. I totally recommend the book F. Rodger Devlin's Sexual Utopia and Power. The book is basically about why the whole feminist market and why relationships are not working out today. And Devlin will even go as far to say, well, that's why white men are going with Asian women. I'm paraphrasing. He didn't say this text. But I'm saying is, if you read Sexual Utopia and Power, you will understand this dynamic that, well, women believe in this fictitious ideal about men. They'll read Harlequin romance fiction and go after this guy who spends the most money, the highest socioeconomic position. He can be the most ugliest guy ever. Women will throw themselves. Meanwhile, the strong guy doing his working class job, he just has to do something stupid. And the girl says, I don't like your hair color. And that's it. And that's the entire relationship. There are definitely poor relationships creations in the millennial generation right now. And it's terrible. You don't see what people could be marrying and having children right now. They're basically divided by rampant individualism and the ideal of female hypergamy going off and women getting into situations they don't know, and men being basically snuffed out of the equation, and they can't assert any dominance, or they don't have any interest in the say of this. I mean, I'm saying I do sympathize with the whole men going their own way. I'm not myself a MGTOW person, but I get where MGTOWs are coming from.
Just to finish what I was saying, though, I get that, but I just want to make it clear that, like, the backlash isn't. It's not like, oh my God, white male, Asian female is terrible all around. It's that this issue wasn't probably, I guess, addressed a couple of years ago, and men of color are sick and tired of Asian women complaining about this and not acknowledging their own hypocrisy, and that they're pushing their self-hate onto their children, particularly with somebody like Elliot Rodger. How can you say that Asian women are inferior, black men are inferior, Hispanic men are inferior, whites are better? Have a country, particularly in East Asia, that worships whiteness and not acknowledge the self-hate, and not acknowledge that self-hate can be passed on to your children who hate their Asian side specifically. I think that there's a lot of pain that is I guess warranted. I'll give you another example. I looked at a video a couple weeks ago, and this guy in Japan interviewed 30 people who are women, Japanese women, and they said, would you rather date a white guy or a black guy? Both relatively attractive. Most of them said the white guy. Then compared the same black guy who was relatively attractive to a fat white dude, and they still wanted to date the fat white dude. Yeah. Like, that's gonna get, we understand it's connected to how whites were viewed in society, white supremacy, whites as a sign of status and a symbol of money, and then you have a very materialistic culture that is Asian that looks at anything as status, looks at men by their status and their wealth, and you realize that a fat white dude has more economic value in their opinion than a black successful man who's relatively thin and attractive. That's going to get a lot of people angry. You know what I mean? So, look, I don't have a problem with white male, Asian female, as long as these same Asian women aren't self-hating, aren't criticizing men for their own dating preferences, and aren't pushing white supremacy. And particularly in the channel that we mentioned already in your website, you got a lot of white men there who are pushing white supremacy, who are dating and married to Asian women, which is ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
Well, it's ridiculous and hypocritical on the point that I think it's ridiculous on the point where if these people just don't want to admit the truth, because I'm all about honesty. Now, if these people were honest, let's just say you take a white supremacist and his wife's Asian, and he wants to live on, which the Haparetic claims these are honest people. I'm okay with that, because at least you're making honesty. Now, what I care about is creating a third positional movement where you don't have to subscribe to white nationalist politics that are going to throw you in the oven because you're race mixing, or leftist politics that say, well, you're a hypocrite and you're just supporting your whites and they're anti-white. And so I'm trying to find that bridge. Now, it's interesting you mentioned self-hatred Asian women. I assume, well, it's funny, the people I know who are, interested in skinhead culture, post-skinhead alt-right culture, they're dating Asian women that either fall in two categories. One, they could be this kind of whitewashed Asian girl that's really geeky and nice. They're not exactly self-hating, but certainly they imagine a third position. And two, you have this Margaret Cho character, or the Asian baby girl, that's that doesn't give a shit. And she's really, and this again has to do with punk culture. This has to do with the interest of just, we take pride in this ideal that we're hated. Right, and if everybody hates us, then we're going to do our own thing. And this is, again, I consider myself an art student, and this is what creates art. This is what creates this very interesting art. It's all about being honest of people's intentions and about understanding of creating this niche that's aware of its own things. I'm actually critical of people who are just not open about this fact. I see a lot of people on the left who will, point fingers and say, look, it's a white supremacist with his Asian girlfriend. It's hypocritical because he likes racist things and this and that. I'm more like, well, this guy just has to create his own niche, his own, if you want to call it Asian Aryan, if you want to call it Eurasian futurist thing, that's neither left or right. And he's just going to do it. And it's like, well, we're just like people who believe Jesus is an alien and this fan club who think the earth is flat. With the internet, you can create countercultures and interesting new things that has never happened before in protest rallies. I was at Unite the Right in Charlottesville in August. You had people on Discord servers come from the Traditionalist Workers' Party to American Vanguard. These people who you would consider quote-unquote LARPy come out and just project their ideals, which are so non-normie, into society. It becomes a cosplay event. And that's what the internet is doing. The internet is creating fast, rampant, super niche cultures and making them come a reality. So that's what I would have to say on that matter. I just again say, well, if it's not your thing, well, I'm not gonna stop what I do. I'm just gonna create more art.
I mean, it's fine. I mean, you can do your thing. That's not the problem. My only problem in general with, again, white males and females, if it's based off of these, white supremacy or like anti-blackness, because I'm half black. I don't appreciate that. Never going to appreciate that, and I'm going to fight that till I die. And just overall, I guess, hypocrisy, because in my opinion, I think there's something to be said about Asian females and white males being socially constructed, particularly because 100 years ago, white men would have never dated Asian women. They would have been considered a demon. And I think that's based off of Asian culture deciding, you know what, we're going to go with the winning team. And if you had made Asian culture realize that, like, going for second place isn't the right way to go, and that if you teamed up with other minorities to fight for equality, then in the long run it'll pay off, then they would just flip like that. Or you just gave them some money because they're just very materialistic. I know that's racist to say, but I mean, I know a lot of Asian women that only care about the size of your wallet. So, I guess I have a problem when it's socially constructed and it's not something that's necessarily natural, and particularly when you have like an Elliot Rodgers who puts that
I'd like to point in two things. I guess the first thing I'd like to talk about is the Afro-Asian thing. I think of myself as also an advocate of biculturalism, which would mean advocation for an Afro-Asian institution. And that includes the right of blacks and Asians to mingle. Now, again, I can't really say that much on the matter because I'm not black or I'm not Asian. And again, I don't want to say, well, Jiro and Billy Blanks are going to do their Afro-Asian thing. It's a small number. I think of it like this. I don't really see there needs to be a more Afro-Asian blogging and a creational scene. Now, the problem is with that is I feel that there's going to be, like, again, liberals are going to use POC talk and say, well, they're going to be a part of the Kalergi plan, and they're going to be a mixed race mud people that have no values or background whatsoever. And it's a part of the great, cafe au lait society. I think from what I've known, I have a friend who's black and married to a Japanese woman. I use this joke, and you probably might be interested in this. There's this ideal where I call it the black privilege scenario if you're married to an Asian person, meaning where they hate themselves for being black because they're married to an Asian, so they want their children to be as Asian as possible, even though they have African, features in them. They want them to be more considered Asian. I call that, the reverse of white privilege. You call it black privilege, and so in that relationship, they're black privilege shows, right? I think it would be more progressive, if you want to use that, if there was more an interest in that African side, and as well the Asian side. That's neither black, neither Asian, but a third position Afro-Asian thing. The same thing when I'm talking about with white and Asian creating a Eurasian thing, and that is what I mean by biculturalism. And I hope that there could be more Afro-Asian things happening. It's just I don't want to be responsible for that because it's just not in my own interest. I have my own thing to go do. And I don't think it should be Jewish interest either. I mean, Jews will probably... if you've seen the new Star Wars movie, you've seen the relationship with Finn and Rose.
Yeah.
That might be one Afro-Asian thing. Okay, that might be a little interesting and cute. But again, I always have this theory as well. They certainly don't want Finn touching the white girl because white people hate that.
Yeah.
So they'll put him with the non-white mixing. But I hate the ideal. I hate the ideal where all the non-whites should mix together to create the whole non-white coalition against white people. I think that's terrible. I think that you have no boundaries of identity or interest. And I really believe Afro-Asians would look out to be Afro-Asian. I don't think they would go to be multicultural unless they want to make the Kalergi plan multicultural interest. That's what I have to say about the Afro-Asian thing. Now, again, we've mentioned Elliot Rodgers.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that Elliot Rodgers, his ghost, has been around for about 3-4 years now. And Elliot Rodgers has been the ultimate joke against people who race mix, especially white or Asian, to create this everybody's Elliot Rodgers. And I don't know if Elliot Rodgers is this Jesus Christ martyrdom figure, but he's certainly this ultimate say on the matter that, well, if you marry an Asian, you have a kid, he's going to shoot up the school, and he's going to shoot up the... And again, it has to do with this apocalypse culture, the shock art, this ideal where... Is there something wrong with Elliot Rodgers? I don't know, because when Elliot Rodgers... I read My Twisted World, and I've almost sympathized with almost Elliot Rodgers' whole points. And I guess he was a narcissistic person. And I read a book with Robert Stark called The Journey to Vapor Islands, and it's about a Jewish guy named Noam Mezabaum, who basically is a character that mimics Elliot Rodger, but in a Jewish way where he wants to get with white girls. And there's a lot of funny things you can admire about Elliot Rodgers. But of course he shot and killed 6 blonde cheerleaders, if you want to put it in that term. And it's almost a joke in a way. And yet people still subscribe to his YouTube channel and make jokes about him. It's so funny you can't believe it has happened, but it has happened. And Elliot Rodgers, unfortunately, just like Adolf Hitler, is going to be this character for I don't know how many years, for at least 10 years now. They're going to say white Eurasians is the supreme gentleman's society. I have to say on the matter as well, if that never happens, they would find someone else to hate the Eurasian equation. But I think it definitely is this weird fad that's going on, and I wish it was downplayed, but I believe in the next 10, 15 years, as long as people forget about it, they will just find another person to talk about, So I don't know. Again, I think Elliot Rodgers is a definite, an answer why people are in the shock art thing, People want to find reasons why you're bad.
Well, I think that the best way to promote white male, Asian female couples, if that's where you're going, is to acknowledge the Elliot Rodgers and the white supremacists marrying Asian women, because there is an argument to be made there, but also to promote white and Asian couples that aren't based off of white supremacy or self-hate. Because when you say, okay, I want to promote Asian and Asian women, white men couples, and I like Asian women, that's fine, but if you highlight the negative aspects of it and you tag it with, I guess, far-right ideals, people are going to get the idea that it is about that. You know what I mean?
It's like you're becoming hyper consciousness about your relationship, and it's not natural.
Yeah.
Like, you notice normal people who are interracially married to Asian women are usually from religious backgrounds, like they're Christian or something, or that they come from money. It's usually money. It's usually materialistic. It's either when you bring this up, they're like, again, the excuse is race doesn't matter, or she's just an individual. I don't see her that way. And, that's not true. That's not true at all.
Yeah.
And I think people are going to become hyper conscious. Here's one thing. There's this thing going on in the alt-right right now that's fortunately disgusting. And the alt-right, as much as they claim to have white women on their side promoting white nationalism, most of them are just, if I want to use an alt-right term, CIA plants to basically get, if they want to call quote-unquote orbiters for subscribers to their channels. And this new term, a trad thought, came about to basically tell the white girls who are on YouTube, just like Lauren Rose, who are basically saying, well, I'm a white girl and I'm a white nationalist too. And then she gets 500,000 subscribers, and they say, and then it works. There's some effect where men go to luring power of women, but in alt-right circles, most of the people hate that. They hate when white girls are trying to use that because it's inauthentic. It's something really bizarre going about. And so when you have, for some time, I really liked Roaming Millennial because I thought Roaming Millennial would basically use that same subversion power to tell white guys to say, hey, there is this Eurasian thing going on, even though, Roaming Millennial says she's libertarian, she doesn't buy into that right-wing stuff. I think it goes more subconsciously into, farther into that, and it works either way. Women are used as tools to make persuade men to do things. And so people become, again, hyper-conscious of the fact that it's not just ideals or rational thoughts. Sometimes, people become aware of these things, and now they're finally aware that white women are being used as tools in the alt-right, and it turns out the alt-right are just a bunch of, they're just LARPy people or immature people who just almost flirt with violence, but at the same time talk all this shit about, I'm going to marry. It's like one thing the alt-right would argue against me and say, well, Pilleater, you just fetishize Asian women. That's all you do. And then they go ahead and they fetishize their own people. And supposedly it's not fetish if you like your own people, but they fetish white women to a degree where it's almost so hyper-conscious. It's almost like it's not natural. It seems like, well, you have to do it or something weird. And it's just bizarre. And again, I think this I really don't have an answer to this. I think I just believe all of Western philosophy in the past 100 years, starting with Martin Heidegger, has been hyper-conscious. Sartre said you could be hyper-conscious if you personally like it. Heidegger said you could be hyper-conscious, but it has to be in the natural world. And I guess that's a huge thing about postmodern philosophy. So that's a big thing to talk about. But again, I know what you're saying when people, it becomes not natural.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what I'm trying to fight, because at the end of the day, if I feel as though I'm being shortchanged with Asian women because the color of my skin is being devalued economically and people are associating me with a thug, whereas white men who are in the same position as me are not considered that, like, I have a problem with that, and I have to fight that.
Okay. Yeah. And you should fight that, and you should do your own thing and create your own institutions and bloggings and ways to figure out. I don't want to say life hacks, but the whole pickup artist thing. I don't know if you've ever know about Rushdie and his whole book Bang. The whole point of the whole pickup artist and Rushdie's Bang philosophy was that white women are so crazy today, you have to follow this weird step-by-step instructions in order to hack into their psychology in order to get laid. And unfortunately, by reading Rushdie's Bang, it seems to be true about women. Now, I don't know how you will go about your ways in order to get your points across to say, appeal to other Asian women to say, hey, as a black guy, I'm not that bad. There are different ways and different methods. I don't know them, but there's definitely this weird way of Yeah, people are at each other because of, I believe, rampant individualism, and everybody's in their own Discord server doing their own thing, and this is causing a very strange way of thinking about things, and it's creating a very LARPy society, and you just got to be strong about it and do your own thing.
So those are all my questions. If you had anything else to add, feel free at this point. I know you said a lot, but go ahead.
All right. So what I'm doing right now, I do have a YouTube channel. I've been busy with my own projects. I casually just do social commentary comedy videos on my YouTube channel. I just got a phone, but I'm planning to make better, longer videos on my channel eventually by the next coming months as I buy a better camera. I make music, and I have a new project coming out. It'll be on cassette tape, limited to 60. It will be out soon. Just follow my Asian Aryan or Pilleater. Pilleater on Twitter, twitter.com/Pilleater. That's where I'm doing most of the stuff. But other than that, I'm just, we're going to try to improve my YouTubes. I haven't been writing. I would like to write, in fact, get most of my blogging posts in a book and get my crap style, because right now the website's okay. It's just that I haven't been monitoring it, so I apologize. I haven't made my annual report yet. But again, I'm on Twitter, twitter.com/Pilleater, and I should have new music out. And just follow my channel at youtube.com/Pilleater. So yeah.